Understanding Mother Stories podcast with Adeline Dubreuil. Your 10 minutes to talk about mothering and matrescence. Hello, Mama. Have you ever seen children hit, push, bite? Maybe it's even a reality for you, or maybe you've seen it at the park, or this is something that has happened to your child at daycare or at school. While, of course, we can't let children get into a habit to use this kind of behavior, know that it's quite common for many children to go through this phase. My story today is about my 3-year-old son, who's in a phase where he hits when he feels frustrated or when he's not getting what he wants. He tends to do this with his sister mainly when he kind of realizes she's stronger and bigger, or she gets more things or more of something that he would like, and it makes him feel frustrated. And he has also hit us, the adults, a few times when he was really angry and frustrated after us. Do we let him do it and say nothing? No, absolutely not. This needs to be addressed, but not necessarily in the old-fashioned way, which would have been to hit back, yell, bite back, or spank, which you might hear from some people around you. Oh, just bite them back and they'll stop. Well, actually, I don't think they stop because they learn anything. It's not okay. They learn that it hurts, and they learn to feel fear. But they might just do it again, just they'll do it to someone else who would not hit back or bite back. The goal is always to understand where the behavior comes from. So my first reminder here is to tell you that when children do hit or bite, especially in really, really young toddlers, it is not intentional. It's an impulse behavior. So I would say there are two main reasons for which a child might get into any of these hitting or biting behaviors. The first one is a lack of attention towards the child, and the child's connection needs are not being met. And the second one is that the child has been hit or bitten or is being handled roughly physically by other children or adults. So this way, they respond also in their own way with a physical behavior. So now, let's dive a little bit deeper into the first reason why children might choose hitting as a response to a situation. If we tend to not give enough attention to our child, they sometimes get into behaviors we see as reprehensible. But for them, whatever brings the parents or the caregiver's attention is good to use. They don't necessarily mean the harm or the hurt it might do. They see that it brings attention to them. And sometimes we accidentally reinforce these behaviors by only giving attention to our child when something bad happens. So it is important to understand that our children are wired to seek connection with us. This is how they feel safe, and this is how they understand the world. We are their models, their safe place, so they like when we spend deliberate time with them. So I just wanted to remind you of that because in the busy lives we have, we sometimes forget and we get caught up in many other things than actually spending daily special times with our children. So let's say that you are so happy because your children are playing nicely and quietly and you can kind of slip out and make supper or answer a message back or even scroll on social media. And then all of a sudden, boom, everyone is screaming, your toddler has hit their sibling who is either crying or screaming, and then you're going to intervene and give attention to their situation. And the part where we make a mistake is that we have a huge reaction. Probably because we, the adults, feel frustrated to have been interrupted and or because we feel that having a huge reaction is actually going to prevent it from happening again. But it doesn't work this way. We, the adults, need to use our prefrontal cortex, the frontal part of our brain, that is where impulses and impulse control happen. Because we are not toddlers. And we do have some control, or at least more than a toddler, for sure. So if we give a huge reaction to the situation, we might actually give the child what they want, which is attention. It's negative attention, but it's attention nonetheless. But if we give them like a more boring response, a controlled response, they are not getting the same attention. And then with this type of controlled reaction, we don't feed the will of the child to keep on doing it. Of course, if we react with screaming or physical violence ourselves, like hitting back, spanking, screaming, we're fully feeding the child that violence is actually a proper response to any emotional trigger. So it does take some control from the adult, which we know is not easy, especially when we want some time for us, or we just feel all kinds of strong emotions ourselves. Especially when we see our child hitting anyone, it tends to trigger us. And we might tend to feel bad or guilty, and we feel responsible for our child's behavior. But hitting is often a phase in the toddler's development, something where they discover, as they understand their body power, and it can also affect others. They realize the effect it has on other people. But it's all part of the learning process. And really, children are in need of connection and in need of learning skills to handle these situations that they'll get into. We tend to talk about it negatively by saying, oh, they do that because it's attention seeking. But all it is a need for connection. And when you change the narrative, instead of like, oh, this child is just like, is always doing like attention seeking things, but you replace that by saying, this child is in need for connection, which is a way more positive and realistic way to see what's happening for the child, then you might not see it fully the same way. Now, of course, if your child is being hit, whether it's by adult caregivers or other children in their environment, it seems to them like a proper response to think it's normal to use violence to respond to a situation, or that it's the proper response when we have strong emotions. Of course, if you're here, you are not necessarily using that kind of behavior with your child. You might not be using screaming, you might not be using physical violence. But when our children are away from us, in the hands of other caregivers, we might not have as much power over how people communicate with our child and handle our child. So it's important to have your child in the hands of people you trust. Unfortunately, you do not have power over how other children they're in contact with are being raised themselves. These children might also have adults who are rough with them physically, or they do like a lot of connection and their needs are not being met. And so when they're frustrated, they will have these behaviors with your child. And you don't have power over this. So don't forget to communicate clearly with the adults in charge about what's happening to make sure everybody knows about the situation and that this phase can go away eventually and we can all work on it together. Never try to handle things with blaming other people because it never really goes well for anyone and it puts your child in the middle. But always remember that when toddlers are having this kind of behaviors, they don't mean the harm. They either feel like they are defending themselves, which is often the case with older children, teenagers, and even adults who lack impulse control. Toddlers have so much to learn that it's not always easy for us, the adult, to understand and have the proper response when it comes to this kind of behavior. It's really hard, and it does take some work on our part to respond as gentle as possible while still holding the boundaries that hitting is not an appropriate response to anything. If your child hits you out of frustration or anger, protect your own body by either stepping back away from them or hold their hand gently, if you can catch the gesture in the hand before it happens, and gently say, I will not let you hit me. Or something like, I will not let you hurt your brother. Then if the child is having a tantrum or a meltdown, it's okay. Respond to the meltdown instead of responding to the hitting itself. Give the child some space because it's about big emotions. And no lecturing, because the lecturing is not going to be useful. The child will not hear you, especially during a meltdown, and they won't understand anything while they're having a strong emotional reaction. Now, for some adults, we don't like to see these behaviors in our children, and they do trigger the fact that we might have had a lot of physical violence ourselves when we were children. So if that's the case, if that's the kind of trigger you're working with, go back to my episode on triggers to support yourself in these harder phases. While this is very difficult to face as adults, we are responsible for handling our own emotions, and our children cannot do this for us. It's not in their hands. Remember the basics of self-care during a difficult situation with your child. Step back, breathe, and repeat to yourself, I am in control. My child is having a hard time. How can I support him or her? Let's do that again. When you are in the middle of this, step back, deep breathe, and repeat to yourself, I am in control. My child is having a hard time. How can I support him or her? Until next time, Mama. Hey, Mama, would you like to have some more clarity on the kind of mother you want to be, or you need help to get where you want to be? Then go to omama.ca and grab my free journaling challenge. I will help you every single day get where you want to be.